Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Fire and Ice podcast. My name is Chris Crawford. Today is Thursday, September 21st. I'm joined today by my good buddy Drew Silva. Drew, how's it going?
Doing all right. Excited to break down another slate of baseball games with you. First, we'll do a little weather check, and the only real trouble spot that I see is Cardinals, their series finale against the Brewers, which is an afternoon game. It's expected to be like a 22% chance of precipitation. It looks like the most beautiful morning ever in St. Louis right now. So I don't know. Maybe there'll be some rain coming later, but that's worth keeping an eye on. I'm glad to be spending this beautiful morning talking on the internet with you, Chris.
Same.
I'd rather be nowhere else.
I can think of like 4 places I'd rather be, but I'm not going to name them on this show today. So yeah, that's good to know. Unfortunately, a bunch of injury stuff. Javier Baez is an injury situation that we got to pay close attention to. Christian Yelich, of course, with what's going on with him. Seems that he's been day-to-day since about July, but it's actually been a little bit less than that. What else do we have to pay close attention to today, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, probably the lead story on the injury front is Vladimir Guerrero Jr., who was scratched from the Blue Jays lineup on Wednesday against the Yankees because of right knee discomfort, and he's undergoing an MRI. I think he was sent for that on Wednesday night. Hopefully, we hear something more ahead of Thursday's series finale. I would guess that he's not going to be in the lineup, even if it proves to be relatively minor. Blue Jays manager John Schneider said recently that the knee has been a lingering issue for Vladdy, but it's only soreness, nothing structural. I don't know if that was a guess or if he had a previous MRI. We'll see what this latest round of imaging scans shows us. And then, yeah, Christian Yelich has appeared in, I think the count is up to 1 of the Brewers' last 12 games.
Wow.
Because of a lingering back injury. They keep saying he's making steady progress, that he's been participating in pregame drills, but who knows if we're going to see him on Thursday against the Cardinals. Tyrone Taylor's getting a lot of run in left field right now. Could be kind of a cheap play to plug into a DFS lineup if Taylor gets another start. You mentioned Javier Baez out again Wednesday with lower back tightness, might be missing from action Thursday against the A's. More on that matchup later in the show. And I'll just run through a couple of things to look out for real quick. Luke Raley hasn't started a game for the Rays since he collided with a staff member while catching fly balls last Friday. There's not much clarity as to like the exact injury that he's dealing with, but Raley was held out again Wednesday versus the Angels. We'll have to check the lineup for Thursday's series finale. It could be that Raley's fine and was simply sitting against back-to-back left-handers. The Rays face lefties on Tuesday and Wednesday. There's no word of like a concussion or anything overly severe. Randall Grichuk also worth monitoring in that series. He got hit in the head by a pitch on Tuesday, was held out Wednesday. No concussion symptoms, but he could need another day off for the Angels, who've tried to pass Grichuk through waivers like 3 times now. Aaron Hicks remains day-to-day for the Orioles because of hamstring cramps. Brandon Crawford made an early exit from Wednesday's game in Arizona because of hamstring tightness. This sounds like this could be a season ender for Crawford with only 10 games left. They're not saying it's a strain, but it's probably a strain. And man, you can stick a fork in them, by the way, the Giants. They've fallen too far back in the NL wildcard standings, with most teams only having 10 games left to go. And then Everson Pereira, he was supposed to get a lot of run with the Yankees down the stretch, but manager Aaron Boone said that he's going to play regularly, but he hasn't played at all or barely. I think he appeared in 1 game over the last week because of a lingering hamstring issue. Could be held out of action again in Thursday's series finale against the Blue Jays.
It's a lot of injuries. It's a lot of stuff that's been going on, man.
For a Thursday.
Yeah, especially for a Thursday, and knowing that a lot of guys are off and, a lot of guys in, postseason mode, yet we call it the postseason in October, but these are really playoff games. You're win and ins type of stuff. That's interesting. I was looking at this. The Giants, I didn't realize that they'd fallen that far behind, and then they don't play any of the teams that are ahead of them either. That's really tough. Their one hope, I guess, is that they're playing the Dodgers, who are probably going to be setting things up a little bit, and then San Diego, who is, done. Like, so there's very little chance that's kind of stinks. I was kind of, we've talked a lot about our lack of belief in the Giants, but it's no fun to see. I was rooting for some more chaos in this thing. Was rooting for some more chaos in this wild card.
They were already running a thin rotation, and then now Alex Cobb's out for the year. Who'd they lose? Like Keaton Wynn to the COVID IL. It's, I mean, are they like a team that's deserving of getting into the playoffs? What does deserving even mean, I guess? But
fair point.
All of a sudden, I think there were about 6 teams vying for that final, or those final 2 NL wildcard spots. It's now kind of like a 3-team race, which isn't as exciting, but certainly those races are not decided. This is going to go down to the final weekend, for in a lot of different areas. So there's plenty of exciting baseball to look ahead to.
Oh yeah, American League West, especially as a Seattle Mariner fan, I got to tell you, looking at that standings and seeing that all 3 teams are just a half game within each other, and knowing that my Mariners play the Rangers, the Astros, and the Rangers to finish the year, that is going to be an absolute blast.
Stay hydrated, take care of your heart, all that.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Let's take a look at some stacks. And even on a Thursday, I think this is actually a pretty good. We'll talk about the pitching. I'm not as in love with the pitching, but I do think there are some lineup stacks that you can take advantage of, and make sure that you're using the Sports Logic, Fantasy Sports Logic Contrarian Edge Optimizer. You can scan that little code if you're watching this on YouTube to get a very cheap trial. You can go to the Fantasy Sports Logic website. If not, it's excellent. Drew and I are just having a blast using this thing. There's a ton of really good tools. Cannot recommend it enough. But Drew, who's the first lineup that you're looking to stack today?
I'm going to start out with the Braves, and I claimed this very early this morning so that you couldn't grab it. At the Nationals, I'm going Austin Riley, Michael Harris, Marcell Ozuna, Sean Murphy. Nice. You could throw in Ronald Acuna Jr. as well, of course, if you want to commit most of your budget to this stack. You could throw in a lot of different options, but we'll definitely have to see what this lineup actually looks like for the Braves on Thursday, having already clinched the NL East title exactly 1 week ago. They're going to find rest for their regulars down the stretch. Sean Murphy got the day off Wednesday with Travis d'Arnaud doing the catching. So I assume Murphy's going to be back in there behind the plate for Thursday's game at Washington. But keep an eye out on whether Riley, Harris, and Ozuna are actually in the starting lineup. This has been legitimately one of the best offensive years of any team in baseball history. Atlanta has a combined 842 OPS. No other teams above 799. A combined 291 home runs. No other team has more than 237. They can absolutely smash teams as they've done all year. They can have some crazy crooked number type innings. And the Nationals with right-hander Jake Irvin are ripe for a smashing here on Thursday night. Even if one of those names that I have listed winds up sitting, or a couple of those names wind up sitting, I'd keep the stack and just throw in a different Braves hitter. I think that's how tasty the matchup is and how deep Atlanta's lineup is. Irvin allowed 4 earned runs over 4 2/3 innings last time out at Milwaukee, 5 walks. He's given up 51 walks in 118 1/3 innings overall this year. That's danger zone. Those kind of free passes for a lineup with this kind of ability to produce big hits. I'm going all in tonight on the NL East champions, at least from the offensive side.
I think that's a really good call. And yeah, I would have taken him if I wouldn't have slept in. There's no question about it. That is a really strong option. And hey, if a few of those guys do sit, I do think that's a great point, that it offers opportunity to add some cheaper guys into the lineup, and you can add maybe some star power. Definitely looking for that one as a quality option. I'm going to take another NL East team. I'm going to take the Phillies against another NL East team, against the Mets. David Peterson has actually been pitching better as of late. In fact, is coming off a 10 strikeout game, and he's actually missed quite a few bats as of late. I think it's time for David Peterson to go back to being David Peterson. I'm maybe doing a little Cinderella pumpkin type of situation here. This is a guy who, against right-handed hitters, They're hitting 294, 376, 463. Lefties are hitting 289, 355, 495. So it's not like he is just a loogie type of guy that would be in the old style of baseball that you would get to see. But I will be stacking some right-handed hitters. I'm going to be going with JT Realmuto, Alec Bohm, do have a lefty in there, and Bryson Stott, and then Johan Rojas, I think, is an interesting cheap play, assuming that he is in the lineup. And as Drew points out, this deep, you cannot set it and forget it with anything. You obviously can't do that with daily fantasy sports. And if you're playing in redraft leagues, and most of you are, you got to pay real close attention. There are going to be a lot of changes to lineups. Guys are going to get scratched if there is even the slightest thing, especially for teams that are out of it, teams that are in it too. Like, the nice thing about your Brave stack, by the way, Drew, is that I think Atlanta needs to start getting going. They've really struggled as of late, and they are kind of in danger of losing home field. And home field, I think, is going to be a big thing in that assumed, we'll probably get something different because that's how baseball works, assumed Braves, Dodgers, NLCS. I think you want to be playing in Atlanta more than you want to be playing in Los Angeles. But long story short, give me the Phillies to have a big offensive night against David Peterson.
Yeah, those teams that clinch really early always have to contend with that issue. Do we worry
Complacency
about
and
resting guys, or do we keep the pedal to the metal? The Braves have done it, I think, pretty well. Like, they'll just rest one starter per
sure.
night. And, Sean Murphy, like, he catch him every other day down the stretch. That's fine. Maybe he catches, 2 of the final 3 games in the final weekend or something to that effect. But yeah, you got to kind of toe that line between, making sure guys are as close to 100% health as possible going into the playoffs, but also making sure they're in a good groove offensively, which I think is a real thing. I know what, like, analytics kind of really exploded into the world. It's like, oh, well, hot streaks aren't really a thing. And I mean, there's still a human element, like doing anything. When I played junior varsity baseball, sometimes I felt really good at the plate and sometimes I didn't. Like,
Right.
when you play football, like, sometimes everything clicks with your offensive line, or even when you're
Yep.
like writing, maybe something we know better is just like writing an article.
Sure.
Sometimes you look at that page and it's like, I got no idea. And sometimes it's the words are flowing.
Yep.
I think we're just human beings. We're creatures of habit, and when you get into
Amen.
good habits, good things happen. I don't know. I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm an analytic based, like, baseball person,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes we forget
Human
that
element.
people are humans. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the human element, Drew. The human element is that it's not umpires who can't determine what balls and strikes are. The human element is all of that other stuff.
yeah. Anyway, I don't know why I just got up
I
onto a
love it.
stage and started
I love it.
speaking down to the people. But
Beautiful.
my second stack is going to be Guardians versus Orioles. Stephen Kwan, Josh Naylor, Gabriel Arias, and Cole Calhoun. Atlanta was my pricey lineup where you'd have to go cheap probably on starting pitching. But say you want to pay up for a Gerrit Cole or a Max Fried on this slate, stack some Guardians hitters with them. Probably the left-handed bats from Cleveland that are most appealing to me, going up against young Orioles right-hander Grayson Rodriguez. Jose Ramirez, would never be a bad play either, but I'm targeting the strict lefties in Kwan, Naylor, Arias, and Calhoun. And hey, Grayson Rodriguez is coming off probably the best start of his career
Sure.
last Saturday against the Rays. 8 scoreless innings with 7 strikeouts. He's been in a good groove for the last month plus, really. But if you take a look at the splits, he's given up an 854 OPS to left-handed hitters in his first year as a major league pitcher, a 351 on base percentage to lefties. And if the Guardians offense does anything well, which it doesn't do a lot of things well, but if there's one thing, it'd be they make a lot of contact and
Yes.
get on base at a decent clip, or at least threaten to get on base at a decent clip. I don't are we reaching the territory where Grayson Rodriguez hits a wall too, like, or where
Yeah.
his workload has to be managed a little bit closer? I know the Orioles are still, working to lock down the AL East title, but they're 2.5 games up with 10 games to go. Do we see Rodriguez make an early exit here on Thursday? I
Sure.
think maybe they're going to watch him a little bit more closely than they did against the Rays because of how big that series was. He's at 152 and 2/3 innings right now between the minors and majors after totaling just 75 and 2/3 innings in 2022. So if my math is correct, yeah, he's doubled the innings total already. I think the Guardians get to him tonight and get to that Orioles bullpen and play a little spoiler while halting their own 3-game losing streak.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. And I will say, I do like Grayson Rodriguez. It wouldn't shock me if he threw 4 or 5 shutout innings, maybe even
Yeah.
6 shutout innings. But I like that cheap play. I think that's going to be a nice contrarian play as well, because I don't think people are immediately going to be thinking Guardians, but there's definitely opportunity, especially with how well Stephen Kwan's been playing as of late. I like that call quite a bit. And I would tell you if I hated it, Drew. You went with you went with an expensive and a cheap one. I'm going to go with the cheap old Los Angeles Dodgers. No, there's nothing cheap about it, but I'm still going to be using the Dodgers as a nice expensive play. Look, Kyle Harrison has a bright long-term future, but I'll take the Dodgers. Even with 1 or 2 of these guys sits, I'll still take the Dodgers as a very good option for a big series for them. They are. I still think it's a big series because it's a rival and against the Giants. They can kind of put the nail in the coffin, because like what we were talking about, and the fact that they are still in this to get home field advantage. And I do think home field advantage means something for these guys. Of course, the Dodgers have made the postseason every year since, I believe, 1743. Don't Google that. It will just get you into trouble. But I'm going to go with Will Smith, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, and Miguel Rojas. Rojas being your cheap option. He's been swinging the bat a little bit better lately. That's a nice little thing and a chance to get driven in by a few of those guys that we mentioned above. Of course, you're going to want to pay attention to make sure that these guys are in the lineup, but star power against a rookie that has had command issues is the understatement of understatement. Does offer some swing and miss. There's no question about that, but I will take my chances with those loaded star lineups against a team that, is just scuffling real bad. That sweep to the Rockies. We probably should have mentioned that with the Giants as well. That's really what has put them in the most trouble, but I like the Dodgers tonight.
Yeah, so they officially announced that Kyle Harrison is starting that game. His last major league start before they optioned him and then quickly recalled him, his velocity was really down.
Yeah.
Um, I was thinking they were just going to shut him down for the rest of the year, especially how far they've fallen back now. I mean,
Sure.
it's 2.5 games, but that's that's over with no games in hand to play against the teams you're chasing. They said he looked sharp in a bullpen. He didn't actually even report to AAA. I think they kept him around. They
Right.
said he looked sharper in a bullpen with better velocity, and so they're going to throw him back out there. I don't really. I think Kyle Harrison's going to be a really good pitcher long term, but I don't trust him in this situation. I like the stack against him. We don't know anything, but he just didn't look good
No,
toward the
he
end of
didn't.
his first run with the
Absolutely.
Giants.
And, we have seen pitchers. I just watched this with Brian Wu after a little bit of a shutdown type of thing, that they can, regain some velocity a little bit. But it doesn't guarantee that he's going to regain the command, and he has to
Yeah.
throw strikes. You have to throw strikes against the Dodgers, quality strikes, of course, but you have to do that. Hey, speaking of quality strikes, let's look at some starting pitchers to use. Now, there are some aces that are going today. I think it's more quality than quantity. We were talking about this before we went on the air about Max Fried. And why don't you tell people, Drew, why you're not going to be using Max Fried tonight?
Because they skipped his last turn in the rotation, the Braves did, having already clinched the NL East because he had a small blister on his hand. I'm just worried that they're going to be monitoring him closely, as we've talked about multiple times on the show. They don't have a ton to play for other than, locking down that number 1 seed. I think they're going to be very careful with him. He had injury issues in the first half of the season. Um, I don't see him throwing 100 pitches. I don't see him really topping 90 pitches.
Right.
For the amount that you're gonna have to pay for him on this slate, I'd rather have a Gerrit Cole. I'd rather have, I don't know, even maybe a Grayson Rodriguez, honestly, even though I'm
Yeah,
I'm planning to stack
sure.
against him. I think they're gonna be very careful with him. He threw a bullpen session, was it on Tuesday, without any protective tape on the blister. I don't think the blister is really an issue at all. I think they were just finding a way to get him a little breather. but they're going to be very careful with him. They got Jesse Chavez back from the 60-day injured list. Their bullpen was kind of in rough shape there for a couple of weeks, but I think it's rounding into better form now, and they're going to want to get those guys some use. I wouldn't pay the amount that it costs to get freed just because of all the factors involved.
Yeah, it
I don't know.
totally makes
It
sense.
is Nationals, and he could definitely cruise against them even at 85 pitches. But I think that money, your DFS budget is better spent elsewhere.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. And plus, like, even if he cruises, it's probably not going to be cruising with a ton of strikeouts. Like, he's going to initiate a bunch of weak contact, and that certainly can help. You will take 5 shutout innings in a W. Don't get us wrong, but if he's your starter one, you maybe want to pair that with like 7 or 8 strikeouts. Real quickly, I'll just give you mine. I'm only going with one today because I don't really love this slate. You mentioned a couple of guys that make sense more than Fried, but I think the 2 guys that you're going to be using make the most sense of all. But I'm going to go with Gerrit Cole against the Blue Jays. I think Cole is been strong. It's pretty obvious. The fact that there looked probably no Vladdy Jr. in this lineup is something that obviously helps as well. They have struggled for most of the year against right-handed pitching. Gerrit Cole, I think, is the Cy Young favorite. The betting odds sure have him as the Cy Young favorite. This could be a strong start, could kind of punctuate his ticket to picking up that very first Cy Young. Kind of crazy that Gerrit Cole hasn't been able to pick one up just yet for how good he's been in his major league career. But I will use Gerrit Cole against the Blue Jays in a game that doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to the Yankees, but will mean a heck of a lot to Gerrit Cole.
I would not have guessed that Gerrit Cole has not won a Cy Young award.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's finished twice, or he's finished second twice, ninth once, fifth once, fourth once.
Yeah.
A 6-time All-Star, like probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. Yeah, that's surprising.
Yeah.
That's just bad luck.
That's bad luck.
Yeah. Yeah. So my first starter that I really like is Tarik Skubal at the Athletics. Skubal's price is rising on DFS sites. I think I grabbed him on one of our shows last week too, but it should be rising. He's been awesome over his last 2 outings against the White Sox and Angels. Just 1 earned run with a combined 18 strikeouts in 12 innings. Since the beginning of August, Skubal has posted a 2.64 ERA and 57-10 strikeout to walk ratio in 47 2/3 innings, going up against a helpless, hopeless A's lineup on Thursday night in Oakland. It's good to see Skubal all the way back, man, and maybe even better than ever, coming off season surgery to correct a flexor tendon strain in his arm. And missing the first 3 months of the 2023 season because of that procedure. But 26 years old, reaching salary arbitration for the first time this winter, should get himself a nice payday. And I don't know, hopefully the Tigers can kind of build around him. And I think Skubal can work deep against this A's lineup in what I would guess would be his second to last start of the year before he does go into that arbitration hearing over the winter. I think there's the potential for double-digit strikeouts. That would be like the kind of the ceiling, but a very good shot at a win. He has a 6-3 record so far in 13 starts for a Tigers team that is 10 games under the 500 mark. And when I looked up the standings this morning, 10 games under for the Tigers, like it's not half bad, all things considered. Shout out to Spencer Torkelson. He's taken off. He's nearing 30 home runs. I know Riley Green had surgery yesterday, so that clouds the future a bit, whether he's going to be ready to go at the start of the 2024 season. But I've seen more positives in the second half from the Tigers than I guess I was expecting, because the lineup they trot out there every day, it's like, ugh.
No.
And that Javier Baez contract is not going to get any better, but I guess there are some brighter spots.
Absolutely. And who's the second guy you're going with?
The second guy I'm going with is Ranger Saurez versus the Mets. Saurez has been on a roll lately, a 2.86 ERA with 36 strikeouts and 34 2/3 innings since the beginning of August. There was an IL stint mixed in there for a right hamstring strain, but it proved to be relatively minor, and he threw 106 pitches on his last turn through the Phillies rotation Saturday at St. Louis. So the 28-year-old left-hander is fully stretched out, really pitching at his best here in the closing weeks of the regular season, with a case to be made to grab a postseason rotation spot, depending on what kind of run the Phillies can make in October. I think they're dangerous, a lot a lot like last year. I like
Yeah.
pitching lefties. Speaking of this specific matchup, I like pitching lefties against the Mets. They rank
Mhm.
24th out of all 30 teams in combined OPS against southpaws. This game on Thursday kicks off a 4-game series at home in Philly against the visiting Mets, with all the good vibes on the Philly side and pretty awful vibes right now on the Mets side. So the stats, the narrative, it all works in Suarez's favor to have a really strong outing against the Mets on Thursday.
Like both of those calls a bit. A bit? No, I like both of those calls quite a bit. I guess that is a bit. Like quite a bit is the same thing as a bit. What? Words are hard.
You all right, Chris?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Let's take a look at some outside of our stacks, outside of our starters. Let's take a look at what the optimizer has as some cheaper options, maybe some leadoff guys that you can put in the lineup, or just, some plays that we haven't talked about. I do like the Patrick Bailey call that immediately I see right here. Emmett Sheehan is going to be on the mound tonight for the Dodgers. I'll be curious to see how deep he goes and how effective he can be. He looked good in relief against the Mariners. A lot of people have looked good in relief against the Mariners as of late. But I think that's an interesting one. I think Zach McKinstry is another little cheap option against Luis Medina, who's been off and on. I think that makes sense. Anybody here really stand out for you, Drew?
I mean, the optimizer again likes a Giants stack, and I feel like we do this every week, but we just crapped on the Giants for like the first 25 minutes of the show. I'm not so convinced given how things have gone for them recently, but you mentioned Emmett Sheehan has been very gettable in the majors so far, and even as the Giants like postseason hopes fade, they don't want to get embarrassed by the Dodgers. I think Michael Conforto, Tyro Estrada, and Patrick Bailey are like, somewhat trustworthy hitters that I wouldn't mind throwing in with one of my, like maybe my Braves stack if I need a cheap option there. Akil Baddoo sticks out. I couldn't necessarily figure out a Tigers stack, but I do like some of their hitters out in Oakland because it's Oakland on Thursday. Baddoo has mostly struggled since his mini breakout in 2020, but still has that power, speed, skill set, and can make some noise as a value play. Jake Rogers, he had a rest day Wednesday, inexpensive option at catcher there. I'd say poach some Guardians from the stack I laid out earlier. If you're not actually going to stack them, if you're going to stack the Braves or you're going to stack the Dodgers, maybe throw in a Guardians hitter or two. Will Brennan, the optimizer likes him at a very cheap price. Bo Naylor, a cheap option at catcher. There are a couple names in there that you could grab if you don't like, which I can understand not trusting a Guardians stack necessarily against Grayson Rodriguez because he could be dominant. But I like throwing in some Guardians at the very least.
Sounds good to me. It's a weird one, but we like contrarian plays. It's one of the reasons that we talk about the contrarian edge optimizer. But I do think that's a very strong play that could do pretty well. It does make sense, especially if Grayson Rodriguez is out, not exactly going to go deep into this game. That's going to do it for us. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Listening and watching, of course. You can follow me on Twitter at Crawford_MILB, Drew at Drew Silv. Make sure you're following us. Can't wait to do more of this going forward. Talk to you guys soon.